Good afternoon. Welcome to Leading the Change, Growing Generational Wealth, the second event in the Chamber's Racial Wealth Gap Series sponsored by Putnam Investments. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Over the past 7 years, the Chamber has embraced economic inclusion as a priority issue for our business community. We are proud of our work in programs like Pacesetters and the remarkable work of our board to include more people of color and women at the table. And we are proud of the work of individual companies and business leaders who have embraced DE&I initiatives within their organizations and supported the work of so many community and not-for-profit groups focused on this work. This series is focused on the wealth gap and is part of a three-level approach at the Chamber: research, convening, and action. On the research side, in partnership with the Boston Foundation, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the Barr Foundation, and the Eastern Bank Foundation, the Chamber is proud to be a founding funder and partner in relaunching the 2015 Color of Wealth Report. Unlike the 2015 report that published the survey results and pretty much stopped there, a key goal of this initiative will be to include critical research to discover economic policy and community solutions that will successfully address the barriers that hinder the creation of generational wealth for communities of color. In parallel to this partnership, the Chamber recently launched this Racial Wealth Gap Series to convene and host solutions-oriented discussions that will explore how the business community and all of us can lean into urgently closing the racial wealth gap. So today and in future sessions, I hope we can identify actions we can all lean into together. While we actively work to close the racial wealth gap, it is also important to take stock of the work that is already being done by visionary leaders, researchers, and foundations. In fact, today, we're going to hear from incredible leaders who are at the forefront of these efforts. Once again, I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Carolyn Crockett, who was instrumental in representing and leading the Chamber and our region in this critical work. Before we get started with our panel, a few logistics. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page, and I encourage all of you to utilize the chat and Q&A function during today's conversation. And finally, thank you to our sponsor, Putnam Investments, and their CEO, Bob Reynolds, for their support of this Racial Wealth Gap Series. With Putnam support, we're able to make this program series free and widely accessible throughout Greater Boston and Massachusetts. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. First, we're thrilled to have Glenn Lloyd, Executive Director at Mill Cities Community Investments, Foundation for Business Equity, joining us today. Through the Business Equity Initiative, Glenn has designed and is executing a unique approach to truly scaling up our local Black and Latino enterprises in Eastern Massachusetts, and now Glenn is working with partners throughout the state with this focus. Glenn has also been a pioneer in the field of transformative urban economic development for over 25 years. As president and founder of City Fresh Foods, a nationally renowned food service business, he pioneers bringing ethnic meals to homebound elders and healthier meals to school-aged children. Thanks for joining us and welcome, Glenn. Next, we have Ron Dorsey, Foundation Fellow at Eastern Bank Foundation. Ron is a researcher, policymaker, and strategist whose career has centered around systems change and civic innovation. In his role at Eastern Bank Foundation, Ron focuses on the transformation of early care and learning systems and guiding the foundation's approaches in this area with their commitment to social justice, racial, and gender equity. Ron is the co-founder of Change Agency Limited, a consulting firm with a mission to build a community-level agency required to promote racial justice and ecological sustainability. Ron is also the former Chief of Education for the City of Boston, having served in Mayor Martin J. Walsh's cabinet from 2014 to 2018. Thank you for joining us, Ron. And also joining us is Nia Evans, Executive Director of Boston's Ujima Project. Nia is an advocate who focuses on eliminating barriers between analysts and people with lived experiences, as well as increasing acknowledgement of the value of diverse types of expertise in policy. Nia is a co-creator, along with artist Tamashi Jackson, of Frames Debate Project, a multimedia policy debate project that explores the intersection between drug policy, mental health services, and incarceration in the state of Massachusetts. We're honored to have you with us today, Nia. And last but not least, leading today's conversation is Dr. Carolyn Crockett, Professor of Urban History, Policy, and Planning at MIT. Carolyn's life passion and career mission is to continue to work at the nexus of education, economic development policy, and urban revitalization. Carolyn recently completed her service as the City of Boston's first Chief of Equity, a cabinet-level position Mayor Walsh established to embed equity and racial justice into all city planning, operations, and work moving forward. We're honored to have all of you here today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Carolyn, to get started.
Jim, thank you so much for those wonderful introductions and welcome to our tremendous panel. It is so wonderful to be in the company of these incredible lights and leaders. And so I will just offer a few comments to set the scene and set the stage, and then we will spend some time in questions, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for some questions from audience members. So welcome to our viewers near and far, and please do feel free to utilize the chat function for your questions as they come forward. So we are here really prompted by the 2015 release of the Color of Wealth report. This series is to bring attention to some of the research and findings of that study and to push us forward as we think about an opportunity to revisit that study and bring more work forward. The 2015 release of the Color of Wealth report, as many of us know, unleashed a firestorm of discussion and strategizing on how to close Greater Boston's staggering racial wealth gap. As we all know, oh too well, researchers found that non-white households are significantly less likely to hold liquid assets and are more likely to hold debt, rendering them more financially vulnerable. In this report, the Boston Fed documents the systemic basis of US wealth disparity and the need to elevate public understanding of how financial institutions, public policies, and government actions have created these outcomes, not based on personal behavior, but on policies, on systems, on approaches to work. And so really trying to push our conversation to systems level solutions and conversations. The report also describes how wealth disparity itself on the basis of race will persist in part because of lower rates of intergenerational transmission of assets. The wealth accumulation, as the Fed notes, is vastly unequal along racial lines. But there are two issues here. One issue is the issue of wealth accumulation. How do people accumulate wealth and assets? The second issue is wealth transmission. How do you build wealth? And then how do you pass it forward beyond yourself? Economic literature that we know demonstrates that inheritances, bequests, and intra-family transfers account for more of the racial wealth gap than any other demographic and socioeconomic indicator, including education, income, and household structure. So the ability for families to pass forward their wealth and their assets is an important piece of this conversation. And although we're not focused on that so much today, we are focused on this conversation around generational wealth building. In the Fed's own study, housing and lending discrimination through restrictive covenants were pointed as policies that contribute to the staggering racial wealth gap, and really pointed a finger on the way that redlining and other kinds of practices inhibited families, and particularly Black households, from accumulating wealth. In this way, the literature brings particular attention to anti-Black racism as an enduring feature of the US economic and public policy landscape, one that deserves further examination and discussion. This report talks to us about the ways that people of color were further excluded from post-Depression and World War II era public policy, roughly a period that's around 1939 to 1945. When we think about the GI Bill, the Federal Housing Administration backed loans, this particular period in our history represents a boon for white families and their ability to build assets and wealth. The same period represents a devastating moment for multi-generational wealth building and a setback even for families of color and particularly Black families in the United States. So a lot of this research and a lot of what the Fed has told us back in 2015 really pointed to the need for creating more policies that can help narrow the wealth divide by providing opportunities for asset development. This very much brings us to our conversation for today. This conversation is about how talented visionaries and folks have really taken it upon themselves to think about this longer term question around asset cultivation, growth, and sharing, and what that means for the city of Boston and communities beyond Boston today. We know that even last year in 2021, the Boston Foundation released the Color of Capital Gap that focused on the fact that entrepreneurs of color are undercapitalized and underinvested in Massachusetts to an estimated tune of $574 million. And so there's an incredible opportunity here for us to think creatively and incisively about how it is that you actually grow assets, how you develop them, how you transfer them. And before us today is a group of folks who have done that firsthand. So in this conversation, we have a chance to think about what is happening, what is transformative research, how this can lead to transformative action. Today's panelists represent investors, senior executive leaders, and also people who are not afraid to ask the big, hard questions and tackle them firsthand. We're focused on high impact work that's tackling the racial wealth gap. We have convened a much admired group of doers, people who are very much close to my own heart in terms of their ability to turn action into impact. These leaders have taken a long-term view of wealth building and taken this issue head on, focused on ground-based approaches and a long-term generational viewpoint that focuses on outcomes. We invite you into this conversation not only to learn about cutting edge work happening right here in Boston and beyond, but also to inspire you to perhaps think about how you can join these efforts as volunteers, as supporters, and even perhaps as investors. Today's panel is about bold, innovative work that understands that closing the racial wealth gap is not just about business as usual. Business as usual, as the Boston Fed has documented, is part of what has gotten us here in the first place. Now let's hear from this panel. Glenn, let's start with you. Your work with Eastern Bank's Foundation for Business Equity and also with the Mill Cities Community Investments shows that big change requires big strategic moves. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Color of Wealth report has informed your investment work and specifically how you understand the importance of entrepreneurship and the racial wealth gap itself? Glenn, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Crockett. And let me just first say thank you and the Chamber for getting me back with my old friends here. Yourself, we've been working long years on this topic, Ron and Nia, so any chance I could share some space, it's always a pleasure. I want to start with answering by saying that unfortunately, this is nothing new. 2015, getting this data on the street, folks who have been living this for generations, it's not new. Actually, in preparing for today, I went back and I strung up the name Ida B. Wells. Folks may know that name well, and she was the one that broke the story that the lynchings that were prominent back in the late 1800s was tied to economic purposes, right? It was actually three of her friends who had started a grocery store and were actually attacked and defended themselves. And the white mob turned that into the ability to take them out of their store and lynch them. And clearly that asset goes away. And unfortunately, we see that pattern over and over again. So this goes well, into the history of this country. And in my particular energy recently has been around, urban farming and farming itself. And again, turn of the century, that's where a lot of our folks, had, at least the folks that, came out, had some land ownership. And you saw a lot of this targeting happening with property owners. And I can go on, but I think actually it's really important to kind of like internalize this historically, because to understand that, then we can really get into the conversation of how we go about changing it, right? And let me just pivot that, because I do think that the Color of Wealth report served a bunch of purposes. And one of them was, hey, this is happening, especially for folks who are not attached to it. You know, when you get that stark numbers, it actually grabs attention. And so what we've done, and we'll probably get into a little bit later in the conversation, we focus on this ecosystem approach. You know, if you're going to build wealth, there's usually kind of a couple of categories. You know, it's equity. You know, home ownership is usually the first phase of that, and then folks who have the ability to invest in the stock market and bonds and so on and so forth, or in their own businesses. And we've spent a lot of energy around supporting Black Latinx entrepreneurs to help build the equity in the business side. How do we strengthen the balance sheets? And I'll just give a high level, because I think folks who are probably listening in, you probably have some entrepreneurs, you have some folks who actually work in large corporate, but especially small business, it's very hard in general to take something, start it, and grow it. And that's why, again, we've kind of taken this ecosystem approach. And some of the high levels of that is this, it's kind of like a 4 fundamental piece is operations. And we really support these folks around their operations and understanding if you're not running an efficient operation, you're quickly out of business. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs don't spend as much time on this, but it's one of the most important parts of the talent. You know, who's around you in terms of your leadership team and your operational team, and we work on some of these issues. And then it's market. It's like, how do you get more business? And so it's market strategy, it's access to market, and then sales is how you execute towards getting, actually getting the accounts and more customers. And then finally, in our kind of focus is around capital, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that too. But when we bring this all together, we've seen from an ecosystem approach, from a point of deep relationships and trust, our businesses stay around. And so that's the first phase, especially when it came through the pandemic. And now we see a lot more of them thriving and surviving and thriving. So I'll stop there, but hand it back.
Thanks for this point also. You're starting to drill us into this discussion about capital, because from the same TBF report, we get this stat that, and you were alluding to this, Glenn, that nationally Black and Latinx firms receive 3% of venture capital investment compared to 25% for Asian-owned firms and 72% for white-owned firms. And the data and the research is talking also about how difficult not only is it get in terms of access to capital, but because of the reality of the racial wealth gap, folks not having access through their own funds or savings or families to be able to get the venture and the capital that they need to push it forward and to get work done. And so we'll come back to this capital conversation, but so important. So let's turn over here and kind of drill down into the conversation about also what else is happening. And I think next, I'll just go ahead and turn over to you.
Okay.
Mia.
I think when you turn the page, the mic is getting a little bit of it noisy.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the tip for sure, because I couldn't even hear myself. Is that better? Better now? Okay, that's better. Great. Okay. So Glenn, you started to talk to us a little bit about the work that you're up to, and I wanted to be sure to pivot to Ron, and I'm glad you can hear me. So let's pull a little bit closer. So Ron, you also have been leading this groundbreaking work for as long as I've known you, if not longer, right? This work to think about wealth, to think about on the ground investments, and to think about what communities really need. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your take on the Color of Wealth report, how it's informing your work, and specifically some of the family-focused work that you've been doing? You've been leading this work for a while, and I know we've talked about it some, and maybe you could share a lesson or two from some of that work you've learned so we can hear about it.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank the Chamber for hosting us today and hosting me today. I want to follow suit with Glenn and say thank you to Carolyn, Nia, and Glenn. You are folks that I rely on personally and professionally, and it's always good to be in a space with you. Carolyn, I'm not going to go as far back as Glenn did, but I am going to take us back to a time when we were both in government together. There was a Fast Company article that I read in 2014 that didn't tell me anything new, but reminded me of something that I needed to be fully aware of as the Chief of Education for the city of Boston. The article was called "The American Dream is Dead. Here's Where It Went." The author of that article quotes a Chicago Federal Reserve economist who says that research shows that successive generations' income are more tightly associated with parents' income than with school success and completion. Poverty is and has firmly been intergenerational. And so what I needed to do was to remind myself that if we are talking about the acceleration of school performance, it fundamentally is about household economic stability. And if we think the fundamental problem is resources and capital, let's work on the resources and capital as opposed to telling families, hang in with us for 12 years, hang in with us for 16 years, and let's see what happens, when increasingly we know that what happens is very tenuous in terms of economic mobility. And so it was probably about 2016 or so, I started a series of conversations with the Family Independence Initiative, which is now up together to build what has now become a continuum of work. And interestingly enough, where our collaborative outreach began was with the Boston Chamber of Commerce, where we approached Jim, Justin King, and Sheena Collier and openly asked aloud, what might it look like if member companies were contributing a fraction of profit to a pool that was dedicated to guaranteed income in the city? So we played around with that idea, and I think that conversation led to a number of formative ideas that then led to the Massachusetts Department of Transitional Assistance building a pilot off of some of these ideas, whereby in Roxbury and Jamaica Plain offices, you could opt to participate in the Family Independence Initiative as opposed to receiving traditional DTA benefits. And what this would mean was that you would get the institutional support from the Family Independence Initiative, but you would also have access to unrestricted supplemental income. And I want to underscore unrestricted, because the first insight and lesson that I want to bring forward is, I think, the correct insight that FII has and that we should all be reminded of, is that part of the reason we haven't developed more powerful anti-poverty solutions is that many of the things that we experiment with build on our collective distrust of poor people. So this effort has really been an experiment to say, look, these are folks who have unique and often more formidable capabilities with resources than we do. Let's actually give them the resources that they need to live. Currently, that work is going on right now and is being evaluated through a random controlled trial study. This later built into a relationship with Jack Connor's team over at Camp Harborview, where Jack asked me and my wife in 2019 if we would help he and his team think about what our response should be to the Color of Wealth report. We explored a number of avenues and developed in collaboration with Spinnaker LLC, an analytics firm led by Nirav Dagli, a guaranteed income pilot for 200 Camp Harborview families to receive $7,000 per year over 2 years in supplemental unrestricted income, and to evaluate what happens. But this was really built on an insight that we had about understanding that the financial health of their households and things that they were telling us, that what they needed to achieve was what we started calling economic escape velocity. And the way that we define that is it's the amount of capital directed to and the rate of investments in families needed to build resources, eliminate disposable income and savings deficits, and amass financial surpluses at an accelerated rate in order to rapidly escape cycles of financial instability. And so, we did a bunch of projections and analytic models that suggested that there is a point at which $1 into a household creates more than $1 of value and starts to then help that family build reserves and opens up a whole different set of choices and opportunities for those families. So we're continuing to learn about what we think will have great promise. Finally, Eastern Bank Foundation kind of built on this in some ways during the pandemic, when we realized that there was an acute crisis among early childhood workers, so that some of those workers who were laid off around the region or furloughed, we again called the Family Independence Initiative to start a supplemental income effort to make sure that we could buoy them through this crisis.
And it's amazing. I think I appreciate you just giving us some of the intricacies of the modeling there, Ron, because I think some of the studies are showing that when people say the problem is too big, there's nothing we can do, this issue of what you found out in terms of what families need and what can actually really catapult folks into a place that's more stable and something to build on is definitely shown through the work with Up Together. So appreciate just more insight there. Nia, let's come to you. And thanks for the feedback, everyone. I'm going to just try to take my glasses off so I can see my notes. We'll see if this works. So keep them off the mic. So thanks for the feedback. So Nia, the Boston UGMA project is work that is literally rewriting the story and the book on how funding decisions are made in under-resourced and wealth-extracted neighborhoods by really creating this thing, which is the nation's first democratically governed social investment fund. What is your long-term hope with this work and the vision, which is so important? So thank you for being here. We'd love to hear your take.
Thank you, Carolyn. And there'll be a bit of a theme in the way Glenn, Ron, and I have started our remarks. First, with, of course, thanking you, Carolyn, for the invitation to this conversation, and thanking the Chamber. Echoing, always good to be in a room with the three of you. So we're all in a deep relationship with each other, and also going back in time. But like Ron, not going back as far as Glenn, and also not even going as far back as Ron, because I think maybe the time period you're talking about maybe is 2015, 2016, Ron, maybe a little later. I'm gonna actually go back to a very recent time period, which is 2019. UGMA first is Swahili for cooperative work and responsibility. It's recognizable to many people as one of the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, which is a 7-day celebration period. And the principle UGMA is celebrated on the 28th day of December. And so what we do is every year we send out a message. We've called it UGMA Day. And we send out a message to people that we are in relationship and conversation with. And thinking about this, I went back to December 2019, where our message was a new normal is here. And also just thinking about how kind of prescient, I guess that is, because it's that's just a few months before the pandemic, where we're all now thinking about what's ahead of us and what new norms look like. But when we sent out that message, we said a new normal is here because we had just completed a pretty big milestone, which was our first investment vote to invest $100,000 in Settle Cooperative, which is a worker-owned composting co-op. And so for us, a new normal referred to an economy that's governed by Black, Brown, Indigenous people and communities, an economy that employs people of color, that employs people who identify as women, people who identify as transgender, people who identify as non-conforming, people with histories of incarceration, an economy that provides good green jobs, an economy that has a multitude of majority BIPOC owned businesses, an economy that has a multitude of worker-owned businesses, an economy that has a multitude of businesses that are carbon neutral, working towards being carbon negative. And so we're ambitious. I would say the long-term hope and vision is that new normal is normal, and that the features and the processes that I've identified, the principles that Ron has talked about when talking about trust, Glenn has also talked about trust, that those are considered foundational to a healthy society, that they're considered basic minimum requirements for healthy economies. And that the way that we transact, the way that we interact, the way that we are in relationship with each other reflect values of deep, genuine trust, deep, genuine power sharing, and deep, genuine care. So pretty ambitious. I would say, kind of in more media specific terms, UGMA currently operates a $5 million fund, and we're conceptualizing our next fund, which will be bigger. So definitely growth is in the picture. We conceptualize that fund will be a $25 million fund. And we're part of an ecosystem of other efforts that are working to build economic democracy where they are. That includes Seed Commons, which is a national organization. It includes Black Farmer Fund in New York City. It includes Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative in New York City. It includes East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative in Oakland, California. It includes Cities United in Louisville, Kentucky. It includes Kensington Corridor Trust in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so, you know, we definitely think that this new norm is spreading, and we're definitely doing our part to work to shepherd the spread of that new norm.
Thanks, Nia, and thank you also for this framing of values. Kind of what does it mean to actually insert new kinds of values, which you all have spoken to in terms of creating the kinds of economy that we need, not just in the future, but now. So how are you building that? And this framing around history, you all know, is close to my heart. So it makes the work easier for me because you all have done it and have lifted up the fact that we're not only talking about generations into the future, but generations from the past. How are we carrying these lessons, sometimes this debt, but also instruction that's informing what we do moving forward? I want to have us to think a little bit about, we've thought a little bit about time. We'd love to think a little bit about place and the way that place and location and neighborhood matters in terms of investments, in terms of how you think through wealth building. This has been a through point in many of the comments that you've made, but also I know your work in this way in particular. And so the color of wealth itself really speaks generally about the Boston metropolitan statistical area. But it doesn't talk to us about the differences between community-specific place-targeted investments and what kinds of difference those kinds of investments can make. I'm wondering, Nia, maybe we can start with you here, since you're speaking to us very specifically about a sort of a neighborhood, residents coming together to direct the fund. You've talked to us a little bit about the new fund that you guys will be standing up soon. Can you share a little bit more about UGMA's decision-making structure and vision for creating, for preparing Boston residents for generational wealth building, and what that means to be place specific? Can you say something about that, Nia?
Sure. So UGMA, as you've stated, Carolyn, so we use a participatory process to govern the investments that are made out of the fund. And one of the reasons we're committed to a participatory process is because we do believe that democracy is a human right. And so that's the first thing. The second thing, we also believe that Boston residents of any area who are the most, and many of us have heard this before, and we agree, but who are most deeply and directly impacted by what's created and destroyed in their communities should have a rightful say in what's created and what's destroyed. And not only that, we think that if there is that rightful say, and if care is taken to really see to how a community perceives its needs and how a community perceives the best way that its needs can be met, that there's actually a closer match between the problems and the solutions. So we've at the top of this conversation, you kind of talked about remarks with regards to the bigness of issues, bigness of problems, and so that sometimes that can be correlated to the possibility of solving that problem. But part of I would say part of the reason we kind of find ourselves spending sometimes is because there's a mismatch. So when Ron talks about, for example, and Glenn did the same thing in terms of kind of giving us the history of Ida B. Wells and asking us to really internalize what we understand as the cause of problems. And when Ron talks about a distrust of poor people, it is a misjudgment, I would say, of what the cause is that leads us to kind of trying things out that don't work. So we say, well, hey, if you listen to the people who are actually going through the experiences themselves, possibly there's a closer match. And so possibly that there's more success. And so that's one of the reasons beneath why we are committed to a participatory process. So I think with that, so I think the way that we help to kind of build generational wealth with this process, with our structure, is first, we make wealth building opportunities genuinely accessible. So I would say many of our experiences of opportunities that have been widely available up until this point, they exist. They're available. They're not necessarily accessible for one reason or another. And one primary reason is just pure out and out pure racism. So just being what's the word? Quite intentionally barred from participating, and then others, as you talked about, the color of wealth kind of talked about these systemic barriers that reduce access. And so what we've done with our fund, for example, the minimum investment, when it was open, I should say it is closed for investment now, so I definitely want to make sure I say that. But when it was open for investment, the minimum investment was $50. So not only were we saying that this wealth opportunity is here, we created it so that as many people as possible could actually genuinely participate in the opportunity. So no kind of preaching, but then throwing up a bunch of hurdles or a bunch of hoops. We also provide financial and political education. So that's, I think education is a part of is an important part of any decision-making process. So it allows our members to participate with confidence, to participate with groundedness, and again, to really show that, there is a place for you in this opportunity, and this place is real. And I don't want to kind of jabber on too much, but there are just a couple other things, I guess, that I want to say here. The other thing that I'm thinking about, and it's something that Ron said that made me think of this, or actually maybe it's something that Carolyn, so I'm not quite sure, but I think the other thing that we do is we provide practice in creating new systems, which I think is one of the pretty exciting things that we do. And so I think with our participatory process, with our commitment to co-creation, with really providing as many entry points and as many avenues of participation as possible, we're providing residents with as much practice as creating new systems as possible, which is necessary, where either older systems have failed or where we're dealing with systems that are based on principles that are not defensible to begin with. And I think we're talking about both types of systems in those conversations today. I think that we're demonstrating that there are multiple pathways. So one of the things that I love about the Color of Wealth report, the definition of wealth is multifaceted, but I do appreciate that, for example, they took care to go beyond home ownership and to look at every asset class. And so that's something that I think about a lot. Is it's really important for us to kind of get beyond this notion of a singular path to success or one right way to do something. And so I think what we try to illustrate is that there are multiple paths, there are multiple ways. And so when we're thinking about generational wealth building, we should feel free to be unconstrained, to be creative. And the final piece that I'll say is, again, Ujima Swahili for collective work and responsibility. When we're thinking about generational wealth, and you talked about this quite a bit, Carolyn, and I was thinking about it, we know that much of it is inheritance. And so for me, just when I think about inheritance, just on the positive side, because there are some critiques of inheritance, but on the positive side, I think about this notion of kind of going beyond the individual or going beyond the present moment. And so when I think about the processes that we enroll people in, where we allow people to consider themselves as a part of a whole, to consider themselves as not alone. I think the very act, for example, of being able to contribute to a fund, so being able to contribute to a whole that everyone can benefit from, I think kind of provides some purpose, some why for generational wealth. And I definitely think it provides one kind of how, which is collective, which again, I say is one of many paths.
Perfect. Thank you, Nia. And a perfect segue for bringing Ron in. And then Glenn, I'm going to get back over to you, but Nia is sort of giving us this understanding of a collective, right? That the word collective very much is a part of what that vision can be. And Ron would love to kind of pivot to you, since I know that there's this relationship from Ujima and some things that you may be working on and maybe they've invested in, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about this new to some, known to others project that you're working on to really bring a new restaurant and performance venue to the heart of Boston. Can you share a little bit about that?
Certainly, and I'm really happy. I'm really happy to share about it. And first, just want to clarify, because some folks may be wondering, why is the guy who's working on early childhood development at Eastern Bank and just talked about guaranteed income about to talk about this thing?
You do it all.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's because the foundation is a great platform for comprehensive thinking, but maybe more importantly, it's all the same conversation. And so when we think about closing yawning gaps in racial income and wealth disparity, it means simultaneously deploying capital in a number of ways and at various altitudes, from worker to household to community and collective to institutional levels. It also means growing the pie for all by equitably investing in the economic stewardship, agency, and autonomy of people of color as well. So, I think the project that I'm going to describe checks all the boxes in a lot of ways, and we would not be here without the Boston Ujima Project, who is our largest investor in the Jazzer Bain Cafe. And so I am proud to be a partner with Dr. Bill Banfield, the former director of Africana Studies at Berklee School of Music, and Nia Grace, who I consider the LeBron James of the restaurant world in Boston. To bring a new arts and restaurant venue that is planned for an early 2023 launch in the Bruce C. Bowling building in Nubian Square. The cafe will spotlight local and national artists who define and celebrate Boston's cultural diversity, and it will be complemented by a full-service culinary program fusing global flavors from local sources. Many, including the city of Boston, who is an integral partner with us on this venture, have observed that Nubian Square has long needed anchor businesses and attractions that extend the life of the square beyond the business day. And many see the Jazzer Bain Cafe as just that, a venue that amplifies the attributes of the neighborhood, provides can't-miss community building opportunities, and that helps to strengthen Nubian's business base. As we see it, this is also the right time to be in Nubian Square, as the BPDA has approved several development projects, including housing, retail, cultural, and educational developments. The next 2 to 5 years in Nubian Square will be explosive. And there are a couple of ways that we can go about this. Either this wealth and this explosion of commerce is going to transfer to the people who live there, the people who work there, or it's not. And we are actually putting some things in place, I think, now that mean that we will see a more equitable future in Nubian Square. It's not just the Jazzer Bain Cafe, but it is many of those developments like the Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute of Technology's headquarters coming, Nubian Ascends, Parcel 8, and the Non-Factory, a lot of things that are about to develop the base of wealth and opportunity for communities of color. As it relates to Jazzer Bain, I think that we are going to bring singular contributions to Nubian Square, Roxbury, and Boston. First of all, will be a wealth building opportunity for investors of color. We want to make sure that a significant proportion of our investor base is investors of color. And again, we are proud to have the Boston Ujima Project as our largest investor. I would ask that those watching go to the Next City website and see an article that was recently written about this partnership that really underscores it as a civic innovation, where community has put its own equity and its own stake in the success of a venture. Will be an employment engine for local hospitality and arts workers, as well as artists themselves, which is important. Will be a hub for diverse supplier networks and a community resource. And very importantly, will be one of the many vehicles through which Boston's traditional wealth holders can start to make reparative investments in communities of color that will generate rippling and exponential value.
Fantastic, Ron. And Nia, thanks for dropping that right in the chat for us. And so what's that date again for us, Ron, in terms of opening launch? What should we be looking for?
Q1 2023.
Okay, Q1 2023. This is fantastic. And Glenn, let's turn to you because we're getting a question also from the audience that's asking for examples of Boston area companies working with communities to build wealth that we can share. And so that comes right back to you, I think, both from your work with Mill Cities, but certainly from the work that you're doing with the Business Equity Foundation. Can you talk about particular investments or particular work that you want to lift up and talk to us about how you're approaching this equitable recovery and economy work, but particularly what's the work? Tell us about it.
Well, first I got to say, for the small business folks listening in, you just heard a model lesson on how to pitch for capital by my brother Ron. That was splendid. I'll just start with a stat that I think is very important to us. When the pandemic hit, and it really hit a lot of our Black and brown businesses more intensely, as we know, we are showing a 99% success rate of survival of all the businesses that we've touched through this ecosystem approach that I mentioned. That's unfortunately a lot higher than what we've seen across the country, right? Especially with Black businesses. We're seeing companies 20-30% out of business. And so the reality is it works. And I think Nia mentioned this thing around access to the appropriate tools. And we said, hey, how do we make sure that our Black and Latinx entrepreneurs and their teams have appropriate and fair access, to the tools for them to grow their businesses. And I can talk at length, but I'll tell two pieces. One is this combination of like what we call high quality, high touch advisory. And I've always said to people, and there's a lot of folks who want to help businesses and so on and so forth. And I hate to say it, a lot of B and C players coming into the space. No, we need A players giving the right advice to our businesses. And so we really step up the standard of who has access to make sure that we're giving good advice. And then when you combine that with capital, I call it the 1 + 1 = 3. We see the results. And it's not just those two pieces, but then it's the broader ecosystem around it. And again, I'm probably going to run out of time, but we've gotten very involved with some of the advocacy work across the state. Eugene is part of the process around what was formed as a coalition for equitable economy. How do we get city and state and federal dollars into the ecosystem to really support these businesses? And I'll just say two quick things around the capital. What we have seen, we've never seen something like this. I think, at least in our lifetime, of literally the government subsidizing businesses. And so there was a lot of cheap, almost free capital that was very important for a lot of businesses to survive. And a lot of our folks took advantage of it. The challenge is, again, I'm very respectful and very inspired by Ujima. Like, what are the alternative vehicles out there for folks to get capital? Because typically it's, you got the banks and you've got the VCs and you got the angels, and these are majority white decision makers who are, unfortunately, there's a lot of bias, and the numbers show that. And so what we've had to do is really almost build an alternative capital ecosystem just to get the capital out on the debt side. And so one of my positions, you mentioned, Dr. Crockett, is Mill Cities Community Investments. So not to get into tutorial yet, but that's a community development finance institution. It's like a community bank. We're one of the few Black-led financial institutions, literally, like this side of the Mississippi, right? Unfortunately. And so what we do is we're getting capital back to these companies. And then we have also, and this is mostly debt. Most recently, we've been able to open ourselves up to do equity investments. Very excited about that. So we have a full range of capital products now with a focus like, by us, for us, BIPOC led for BIPOC businesses. And it's a shame. And I know there's only a few of us that can actually say that. So that's a problem. There should be multiples of us. So we want to do that. And we also want to invest in the systems that are working, right? And that are really getting the capital on the street. So that's just one, kind of a touch point around. And so we want to be also mentioned by Ron soon, right? So we get Jazz Urbane up because it's right down the street from me and I don't have to drive. So we want some music and some drinks in the community. So we see that ecosystem kind of, the feedback loop working on itself.
Yep. No, it's great. And so it's perfect to just get a sense of that work that you're doing with Mill Cities. Glenn, can you let us know what are the cities that are in that basket of work? So since you're someone here who's representing work that's outside of Boston, can you just give us a line about what are the cities or the touch points where you're at?
Yeah, so right now we're statewide. I mean, as far as Springfield, we go into New Hampshire and we go into Rhode Island, both for our capital and for our high touch advisory. I'll just quickly, since you mentioned it, Mill Cities Community Investments is headquartered in Lawrence, and that is a special community, the Merrimack Valley, and for a number of reasons. But they've really been through a lot of crisis where they had the gas explosions and such, and community developed there that I really very respect. And so when we saw, as an example, the PPP money on the second round that we were able to get out to smaller Black and brown businesses going back, in the height of 2020, more than half of those contracts was to the Merrimack Valley, because they had deep relationships and could get access and trust that happened. So that it just shows you that it all starts with relationships. So I just wanted to give a shout out to my folks north of Boston.
No, I appreciate that. It's great because the geography here is expansive, but also you all have this commitment to building out not just a business, not just an initiative, but this word that's been used a couple of times, certainly by Nia, ecosystem. The opportunity to kind of create a new ecosystem for how business can happen, how an economy can be built. I'd love to get a speed round here, unless we get another. There may be another question in the chat. I'll look there in a second. But if there's something that you all want to highlight about your work, or a way that folks who are on the Zoom can get involved or can lend a hand, can we just get 30 or 40 seconds of kind of what's good and what can people do to help? Would love to hear that. Ron, you started us off strongly there. If you want to add, and then we can whip around.
Sure. First, I'm very excited about the work that we've done at Jazz Urbane over the last year. We've demonstrated publicly the demand and great potential through a number of public presentations in partnership with the City of Boston, Ujima, the ICA, King Boston, Roxbury Cultural District, and Daryl's Corner Kitchen and Bar. So we are creating a platform for not only a Nubian-based experience, but a citywide experience. We've successfully raised about a quarter of the capital that we need to construct the space and launch our venture. What folks can help us with most immediately, chamber members, organizations, and individuals, is to follow the community suit and invest in the Jazz Urbane Cafe. Going forward, we want to make sure that you become regulars and that you book events with us so that we can entertain you and your colleagues.
Wonderful. Nia, you got a pitch, a highlight and a pitch for us?
Sure, a highlight, but not a pitch, because I don't pitch, but I do have a highlight. So this year's highlight is Jazz Urbane. This year our members voted, I believe in March, to invest in Jazz Urbane. It's Ujima Fund's first equity deal. We're primarily a debt fund. And so what was exciting about that was it was an opportunity to enroll our members in a conversation about equity and how to assess an equity deal. So that was very exciting for us. And then how people can help. I'm thinking of a couple of things. One, check out our good business standards. So if you go to ujimaboston.com, if you go to Economy Builders, and then I think if you go to Good Business Alliance, you'll see our standards. So chamber member companies, I invite you to check out those standards and see how you stack up against those standards, and help us help those standards become a norm for how businesses are operated. And then the second thing I would say is I would ditto Ron, invest in Jazz Urbane, so you can help us by helping Jazz Urbane. And finally, also, if you go on our website to the Economy Builders page, I believe you should see a list of businesses that are in our investment pipeline. So help us connect with them. So if you see a business's name that you recognize, you have some type of relationship with them, let them know Ujima would love to talk with them. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nia. And Glenn, we'll come to you. And for everyone out there, we will share these links and resources coming out of today's talk. So if you have notes, that's great, but we'll also send them around. Glenn, how about you? A highlight, something to share, how we can get involved, what can we do?
I'm actually really excited about this because I mentioned the CDFI. We do residential lending too, lead abatement and home improvement. And our 2.0 there is a chance to kind of merge all of my small business, my green, all under one roof. And so we are looking at, we've already done 2 bids in to do green affordable home ownership, which focuses on going deeper green, getting folks, electrified off the grid. And then leveraging local BIPOC developers and contractors, and then using our financial products so the folks actually can stay on and do the work. So stay tuned, real excited. And I like Nia's point about a pitch. The opportunity for us is we can get your capital back. So, we take in capital, CRA type capital, other, PRI type capital. And we have the ability, because we have a track record of putting it to small business, which is hard to do. A lot of it's in the housing stuff. We can put it to small business and get that capital back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. I know Jim is going to come and close us out, but let me just start by saying thank you so much again. We could certainly keep chatting. We're getting lots of ideas and things are bubbling up to us here. And so just want to let this be an invitation to keep a conversation going for sure. And we'll be sure to get these resources out to people. You all are megawatt stars. And I said that in the beginning, and you live up to it every time. So thank you so, so much. Fantastic.
Well, what a fantastic conversation. And each of you started your remarks by expressing your joy about being in the room with each other. And I want to sort of thank you for allowing me into that room, along with a couple of hundred chamber members and others, for a fantastic conversation. Thank you for your wisdom, your profound insights today. But on behalf of myself and the business community and the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, thank you for doing the work you do in our community of Greater Boston and Massachusetts. We are privileged to have you here doing the work you do and offering the advice that you did today to all of us. Ron, you had me at Nia Grace. I mean, I didn't need the rest. I didn't need the rest of the pitch. But to the members that Ron did pitch, if part of making an investment decision is the trust, the word that was used today, and the confidence that you have in the people involved, I'm going to vouch for Nia and Ron as people that you can invest in with confidence. So I hope some of you will take them up on that. I want to thank again our sponsor, Putnam Investments, for making this series possible. The next installment will take place on Wednesday, July 13th, with another group of incredible speakers. We're going to bring back your former boss, Ron and Carolyn. The U.S. Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, will be with us. He'll be joined by Ken Turner, President and CEO of the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center. And as always in these events, Dr. Carolyn Crockett will lead the conversation. So mark that on your calendar, July 13th. You can find out more about this event and all chamber events at bostonchamber.com. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. Thank you again to all of our speakers, and have a great rest of the day and week.